Welcome back to the Provisionist Perspective. I'm Eric.
And I'm Drew.
This is the show where we want you to be firmly convinced that Jesus died for every single person on the planet.
Amen.
And speaking of planets, we're going to do a little bit of natural theology today, Drew.
I'm excited. Eric told me that this was going to be a surprise, and I clicked on the record. Like, we click on the little record and it has a little title. Can I tell them the title of the it's called the Bethlehem Star. I don't know what this is about. I'm intrigued, I must admit.
All right, we're going to get into this, the Bethlehem Star. First, I just want to say that we're recording this hours before apparently North Texas is going to get drowned in snow, which of course means 2 inches and the entire state will shut down. So we'll see how tonight goes. Pray for me and our power grid. And when I come out of the winter, the blizzard, we'll post this video. Bethlehem Star. So I want to start with something here. I think this needs a little bit of setting up, because you're going to have, and Drew and our audience, we're going to have a little bit of, you're going to get some pushback. I felt pushback from myself when I was looking into this and I was reading this, and I'm like, no, it can't be.
Best kind.
It can't be this way. And there are a few things about this that convinced me otherwise, that convinced me that this is something we should take seriously. And you don't need to come away with the same conclusions I have. I'm not even sure that I'm set on all of this and everything that it means, but I think this is fascinating. And I think checkmate atheists. And I mean, you're still just an atheist after this. I don't understand it. And what I think it does here is, first of all, I want to ask you a question. Drew, have you thought much about the Star of Bethlehem and what it actually was?
I have. Well, I've thought about it, and I remember kind of researching. You know how when those of us who went to uni or kind of grew up in a Christian background and suddenly went into a secular context and were, sharing the gospel and talking about the Bible and stuff like that, inevitably you receive this kind of pushback. And I remember receiving some of this pushback long ago. And it's kind of one of those things that I remember sort of resolving in my own mind, but then it's kind of one of those things that doesn't come up. So then you just kind of forget about it. Yeah. So I have a few theories floating around, kind of vague theories in the back of my head. But
so I think there's two options, right? There's two options we can think of right off the bat. And it seems to me that it's either it was just this special supernatural event that God performed to announce the birth of his son. And I think that was my baseline assumption. Like, why do I need to know what the star was when it was God can do whatever he wants? Sure. He can just, there's a star, and it's a big ball of light, and the ancients would call it a star because it looks like a star. And I think that was my assumption. Or it could be a natural event, right? It could be a natural event. Yeah, as we get into this, we're Bible people first, right? And I know our hate follows are kind of like, no, not Bible. We're Bible people first. We're Protestants. We believe that anything that we can be assured of is in the Bible. Other things we may hold more loosely, more tightly based on other kinds of evidence. But we go to the Bible first. We're Bible first. And so I want to do this. These passages, as we go through this, will get repeated. But I want to start with them. And I want to open up these ideas to something a little bit more literal and natural. And see if we can't begin to value these passages in a different way besides just metaphor. Now it is metaphor, but maybe it's also very natural and obvious. And maybe this makes God more praiseworthy. So we're going to go to Psalm 19 first.
I love this. I feel like this is divine providence, because my friends, our housemates here that live with us here, were just talking about Psalm 19 the other night. I guess Eric, you and I have kind of like alluded to it because of this upcoming episode. So maybe it was just embedded in my mind and it comes up subconsciously no, you know what it was? This passage, Psalm 19, sorry to go on a miniature rant before we start, but it's quoted in Romans 10, I think verse 18-ish. And so it's really, maybe we'll talk about that, but I'll let you get into it. So
we'll mention it. And all this stuff comes full circle. So Psalm 19, if you're a nerd like us, you may be aware. If you're not, it goes like this. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech. When I first read this, and I had to actually memorize this in Hebrew and stuff. And so I spent a lot of time in this passage, but the first time that I was going through this, I was thinking it meant like, well, day to day, it pours out speech. The heavens day to day pours out speech. No, the day to day pours out the speech of God. Each day turning over to each day. The light and the night cycle pour out speech of God. And night
because it's saying day to day and night to night, right?
Day to day, night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice, the stars, their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber. So this is kind of a marriage. The bridegroom just had his wedding night, and he comes out, and he's proud. It's amazing. He comes out like the sun, like this was the glorious moment of my life, coming out of his bed chamber.
Like he can solve all the world's problems.
That's right. Like leaving his chamber, and like a strong man run its course with joy. So you see people who are amazing runners, or if you watch the Summer Olympics, sprinters, how amazing it is to watch how sprinters run. If you've ever watched Usain Bolt run, it's like a work of art in motion.
Talk about divine providence. What are the odds that your name would be Bolt? And I'm pretty sure that's his. I think it's his
real name. I think it's his real name. I don't think he changed it.
Yeah.
Its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuits to the end. Its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. So, what if we were to take this a little bit literally? Obviously, this is poetry; it's metaphor. But just in the way we would take it a little bit literally, that the stars speak the knowledge of God. Seems like that's what he's saying. What if that's true? That the stars give us knowledge of God. Okay. The next one I want to look at.
I just want to say, as we were reading this, I know that there's space for, metaphorical language or whatever, and I guess I'll throw this up there so that while you're typing anyways. So Psalm 19, where it says that it speaks knowledge reveals knowledge. I don't know how I've not noticed that before.
Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So the stars specifically reveal knowledge. Okay. I've always taken that in a general, natural theology gives knowledge of God, but specifically the stars do. Okay. So the next one I want to go to is Luke 21, verse 25 says, "And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations in perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves." So Psalm 19 states that the stars pour out speech and knowledge of God. And Luke 21, Jesus says that there will be signs. This is of the future, but just that the principle is that there will be signs in the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And so if this is in the Bible, then we ought to take it seriously. And if it's not in the Bible, then we kick it out. So if anything that is coming up doesn't line up with this biblical data, and everything we're going to go through better line up with the biblical data, or we're going to kick it out. Does that sound fair?
Yep. That's me. Okay. That's how I roll.
That's how we roll. That's how we do it. So this is how we were going to do this. And so let's get started. Let's get into it. Let's get started here. So the goal here is going to be for us to take the Bible more seriously, to take natural revelation more seriously, and hopefully we can see God as more glorious and worthy of praise in our own personal lives and in our apologetic to others. The webpage we're going to go over today, and we're going to read through this guy's study, and we're going to discuss it, and I'm going to do a little bit something extra, and I think it's amazing, and you'll see. This is what kind of convinced me as I actually looked into this, and you'll see what I mean by that. This is a website called BethlehemStar.com, and it's researched and written by Frederick Larson. And so this is Frederick Larson. You can look this up on your own if you would like. But here is the study. And we're just going to go through this together. This is what we're going to do today, Drew.
Fantastic. We're
going to discover what was the star. And then I'm going to show you. I'm going to show it to you, Drew. Okay? we're not going to just read this. I'm going to show you.
I get to play the role of the skeptic. I get to be John and you get to be Tim again.
That's right. There we go. Okay. If the star was a real historical event, why are we learning of the evidence only now? Why is this guy on the provisionist perspective freaking out about this now? Why isn't it common knowledge? A few minutes of considering these things will intensify your experience and understanding of what you will learn on this site. We'll look at 3 of the most important factors leading to the modern rediscovery of the star, Johannes Kepler's discovery of how the solar system works, and improvements in our knowledge of first century history and the spread of computers. So Kepler's discovery. He was one of the great mathematical minds of human history. As Arthur Koester wrote in The Sleepwalkers, Kepler and Galileo were the 2 giants on whose shoulders Newton stood. I was a former science nerd in another life, and so those are giants, and Kepler was one of them. A German by birth, Kepler began his professional career in Graz, Austria, teaching mathematics. His views on the Protestant Catholic contest then raging got him banished from Graz after only a few years, but this actually worked for his good. The reason is that about the time of his ouster, the earnest middle-class 28-year-old Kepler attracted the attention of one Tycho Brahe. Tycho?
I would say Tycho.
Yeah. Tycho Brahe. Apart from their advanced math skills, the 2 men had little in common. Brahe was a wealthy, eccentric, aristocratic, overbearing, hard-partying Danish nobleman who served in Prague as imperial mathematician. He was also the acknowledged prince of the astronomers due to the unprecedented accuracy of his vast collection of astronomical observations. And he could be a wild man. When Brahe lost his nose in a college year's duel, how is that even possible? How do you lose your nose? What is that? I guess you break your nose. How do you lose your nose?
They cut it off. They got into a sword fight and somebody cut it off.
Yeah. What's going on? He did better than our modern fashion of piercing noses. He had a complete replacement nose molded of gold with silver, and he wore this the rest of his life.
What in the world? This dude was a gangster.
There he is. Tycho Brahe.
Where's that gold nose, Tycho? This must be pre-nose loss.
So he told the painter not to include the nose. Give me my old nose.
He was. This is pre-denosing.
Denosing. Brahe invited the expelled Kepler to Prague to collaborate and study the solar system, which at the time was still poorly understood. Many still thought of planets as wandering stars. Both men were brilliant and keen to unravel the mystery of planetary motion, but their temperaments were so different that they mixed about like cats and dogs. The professional relationship was decorated with verbal warfare and walkouts. The personality conflict was heightened by Brahe's intent to remain the top dog astronomer. He would not allow Kepler full access to his library of observations. Instead, he dribbled out the data to maintain personal control. But when Brahe died suddenly of a urinary tract problem in 1601, gee, I wonder why, Kepler found himself promoted to his master's position. Kepler himself became imperial mathematician with full access to Brahe's library. That changed everything. Kepler set out.
Was your insinuation that he died from a urinary tract problem was that he was like holed up in his study for so long and he just wouldn't pee, and then he
yes, that's
getting urinary tract infections and
that's
died?
what that eyebrow meant. Totally, absolutely, yes.
This dude was so gangster that he studied for hours and hours on end, killed himself with a urinary tract infection.
Refused to pee, and that's why I tell my 5-year-old he has to stop and go right away. Stop and wash and be on your way, Daniel Tiger. Okay, you'll know. Kepler set to prove that the planets travel in perfect circular or solar orbits. This prevented a kind of mathematical beauty which particularly attracted him. But try as he might, he could not force the mathematics of circular orbits to align with what he saw in the sky each night. And Brahe's meticulous records proved inconsistent with the theory of circles. In an inspirational flash, Kepler saw that the planets might travel in elliptical orbits and found that the perfect mathematical fit. So a circle is just straight circle. I don't know math terms. Elliptical is more like an oval. They're elliptical.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like there's a lesson to be learned here as a side note. I'll just pull this away, but momentarily. In the fact that if you scroll up a little bit here, what did it say about the perfect? He said Kepler set out to prove that planets travel in perfect circular orbits.
Kind of mathematical beauty. Yeah.
Mathematical beauty. I like that there's an illustration to be drawn here, a lesson to be drawn from. It's just so beautiful. It's just perfect. Just these circles but then the math, the evidence, the data wouldn't let him hold to what he perceived to be the most beautiful, whatever. So Kepler had the humility to adjust his opinions based on the facts, based on the math and the data. So if you know, you know.
That's right. I love it. So in 1609, he published the first and second laws of planetary motion, and 10 years later, the third law. These are still used by astronomers, NASA, the European Space Agency, and everyone else studying the stars today. These laws don't change. And this matters because I'm going to show you. Okay. With his brand new mathematical tools, Kepler held keys to the heavens and time. He could do things no astronomer had ever done. With enough pens, ink, and time, he could calculate sky maps showing the exact positions of all the stars and the planets in the night sky, not just for that evening's observations, but for any day in history, as viewed from any place on the surface of the earth. Being a religious man, Kepler soon set his equations grinding on the mystery of the Star of Bethlehem.
Interesting.
It is almost tragic that he didn't find the phenomena discussed on this website, because he pushed very hard in his search for the star and even published on the topic. He would have been delighted to see what you will see. But Kepler was working from a flawed understanding of first century history, and that threw him off the track. So the first piece of the star puzzle is that, thanks to Kepler, we now have the ability to locate celestial objects with great precision at any point in the history from any viewing point. For example, we can calculate what the sky looked like over Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. But that raises the question of dates. For what years should we be scanning the sky?
Maybe this is really common knowledge to sort of more sciencey type people out there, but it's amazing to me that the celestial bodies, the planets and stuff, move with such mathematical precision that you can calculate backwards.
And it moves with such mathematical precision, and we can predict it, and we can predict it for 10,000 years in the future, and we can predict it for 2,000 years in the past, and we can predict it And so that is going to make, I think the whole point of this is that's going to make what we're going to see here today that much more amazing and beautiful and praiseworthy of God. Okay. So dating, so now we need to date Christ's birth. If we're going to do this, we have to date the birth of Christ. The great majority of ancient chronographers held that Christ was born between 3 or 2 BC, and none held that he was born before 4 BC. The ancients were correct, as we'll see, but by Kepler's day, that earlier and better understanding had been laid aside. Kepler and his contemporaries concluded, as many have present-day historians have, that Christ was born before 4 BC. The reason for this misunderstanding are complex and fascinating, but a major factor was their interpretation of the writings of the ancient Jewish historian Flavius Josephus.
So basically what it's saying is that commonly back then, they were saying 2 and 3 BC. No one said before 4 BC, except for Kepler.
No, they're saying that ancient chronographers dating before Kepler's day had it at 2 or 3. So this idea that it's 2 or 3 isn't novel to this website. It's not novel to what we're going to be discussing today. But in Kepler's day, that understanding was lost.
Right.
And it's because of Josephus, because we discovered his writings.
And there it says Kepler and his contemporaries concluded that it was before 4.
Yes.
But that the ancient chronographers thought 2 or 3, but that they didn't have access to that knowledge, or it was tainted by Josephus or whatever. So yes. So and here's why it was tainted by Josephus. And this is just fascinating if you love history and this stuff about Josephus. And it matters to why one of the big objections to this is going to be this date of Christ's birth. And so it's good to front load this. There's going to be questions. There's going to be objections to what we're going over today. So it's good to front load why we think it's 2 or 3 rather than before 4 or 5, BC. So Josephus's life was a wild ride worth a little detour here. And don't worry, we're getting where we're going. Josephus was born just a few years after Christ's execution. A member of the Jewish Pharisee sect, he rose to political prominence in Judea by the time he was in his late 20s. In 66 AD, the Romans, who occupied Judea at the time, were thrown into a war rage by what they saw as growing Jewish arrogance and treachery. Josephus marshaled Jewish forces to defend against an enemy that soon grew to the proportions of a tidal wave. Roman troops, horses, and siege engines poured into the region in simply overwhelming numbers. Resistance proved futile. Josephus and a fighting unit of 40 men were cornered by Roman forces and retreated to a cave where they made a suicide pact to avoid capture. 38 men died in that cave. But Josephus and one other had second thoughts and were taken prisoners. Well, wait. So 40 of them, 38 of 40 killed themselves, and then Josephus and his mate were like, nah, and got captured.
Yeah. Okay. That's a twist, but here's a tighter one. Josephus wound up winning the favor of Vespasian, who was then commander of the Roman expedition in Judea. He was drafted into the Roman war effort against his own Jewish people, and ultimately served as the interpreter for Vespasian's son, Titus. Titus had orders to besiege Jerusalem and destroy the Jewish temple. This he did in 70 AD, in apparent fulfillment of a 500-year-old vision recorded by the Jewish prophet Daniel. After the war, Josephus could not remain in Judea. Jan wonder why. He would have been assassinated on sight. So he was taken to live in Rome. There, his attentions appear to have turned to regaining the acceptance of his Jewish countrymen. Perhaps to achieve this reinstatement, he wrote extensive histories of the Jewish people in the ancient times. These histories offer important clues in the search for the star. In one of his works, Antiquities, most famous, Josephus mentions Jesus, John the Baptist, and the other New Testament characters, including the murderous King Herod of the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2. The Bible recounts that Herod learned of the Messiah's birth from the astronomers who had seen the Star of Bethlehem, the Magi. He tried to kill the child, so obviously the Bible records that Herod was alive at Jesus' birth. Remember that this mattered to Kepler because historians of his time apparently inferred from Josephus' history that Herod died in 4 BC. Necessarily, so you're following, right? Herod ordered the death of Jesus by killing all the children in Bethlehem. And Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus had to be born before that.
Right.
So those are the years for which he scanned the skies of the star, for the star. Even with the power of newly discovered laws of planetary motion, he didn't find the phenomena we will examine here. He searched the skies of the wrong years. But modern scholarship has deepened our understanding of Josephus's manuscripts. A recent study was made of the earliest manuscripts of Josephus's writings held by the British Library of London and the American Library of Congress. It revealed a surprise that allows us to target our mathematical telescopes better than could Kepler. It turns out that a copying error was a primary cause of the confusion about the date of Herod's death. A printer typesetting the manuscript of Josephus's Antiquities messed up in the year 1544. So the originals had it right. There was a typesetting error. You would set the type, and then it would have to, like, if it hit the paper, that was it. You had to throw out the paper. There's no eraser. And then if it hit the paper and you left it, it would make hundreds of copies with the same typesetting because you would typeset a single work. Like you couldn't just typeset anything. You would typeset a single work.
Because this was basically when they had, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is basically when they had like a stamp that was like cut of the manuscript, and it would just like a. Isn't that how it worked?
Yeah. So this was the printing press, and it pressed a typesetting onto a piece of paper, and then you would do that 100 times. Set the typeset for page 2. Do it 100 times, and you go through, and then you get 100 copies of that.
Right.
So if you messed up once,
right. It's kind of like if you had like a little stamp with a star on it, but then one of the little star edges or something fell off, and then it's just stamping, missing one of the edges, and then that becomes an error that just perpetuates in all the copies. Yeah.
Exactly. One error perpetuates in all the copies. So this is just a typeset error. Every single Josephus manuscript in these libraries dating from before 1544 supports the inference that Herod passed in 1 BC. 1. Strong recent scholarship confirms that date. Knowing this, and since Herod died shortly after Christ's birth, our investigation turns to the skies of 3 and 2 BC, which was the original chronology from before Josephus and before this typesetting error. So we have the second factor allowing us to find the star today. We newly know for which years we should examine the skies. So enter the power of computers. Go ahead.
This is exciting. This is interesting. I feel like I'm on a journey to find out what the star is, where it is.
Here we go. This gets so amazing. This gets so amazing. And then I'm going to show you. Okay. Enter the power of computers. I'm going to skip this. Computers can do software can not only do the calculations, but show the night sky using software and calculations. We get this, right? We can
it's
do
like when
this.
It's like when smartphones first came out. You know, I was a bit of a nerd myself too.
Yes.
And they had that thing that you could like look up at the stars with.
Right.
That was so cool. It was Google Sky or something like that.
I think so. There was I think Google bought then. There was one before that.
Yeah.
And then
Now Google owns everything.
I know, including me. Okay. So the stars and the Bible. All right. You may start getting a little bit heebie-jeebie here because we're going to go looking in the stars for the date of Christ's birth and for signs of Christ's birth. And that may give you a little bit of heebies. So what he's going to go over here is this is not astrology. Okay. Here he begins. Even if you are not a traditional Christian or of Jewish faith, you might feel a bit uneasy searching the signs for signs in the stars. Many people have concluded that there isn't anything to astrology, or if there's something to it, it's a something they want no part of. So are we doing astrology here? It's a reasonable question, but with a short answer, no. That's not what we're doing here. Astrology holds that stars exert forces on men.
And basically predict the future,
exactly,
like foretell the future.
Yes. Astrology is a form of divination based on the theory that the movement of the celestial bodies, the stars, the planets, the sun, and the moon, influence human affairs and determine the course of events.
It was the original fatalism.
That's right. It's in the stars.
The original determinism. It's been written in the stars.
It's been written in the stars. So by contrast, as we saw, right, the Bible refers to the celestial objects as carrying signs from the Almighty, but it prohibits, of course, worship of what we see above or even hold such things in too high regard. For example, we read in the book of Job, chapter 31, if I have regarded the sun in its radiance or the moon moving in splendor, so that my heart was secretly enticed and my hand offered them a kiss of homage, then these also would be sins to be judged, for I would have been unfaithful to God on high. The Old Testament.
I need to let me just comment on this really quick since we're on the subject. I don't know if we're gonna. Guys, I was just reading this morning, and fun exercise is I often get analysis paralysis with what to read in the scriptures, and I've been getting back into the habit in the mornings and later-ish mornings. But I have a random Bible generator. I have a random number generator on my phone, and I have a piece of paper right here on the wall with the numbers of the Bible 1 through 66. It's crazy, I know, but this has become my process. I don't know. So I hit the little button, and it tells me what number, and then I look over here and I check what to read. So then yesterday, I clicked and it went to what's the number 5, which is Deuteronomy. And so I read yesterday and then was picking up reading today and got ready to click the random Bible generator thing again. And I thought, no, I mean, I didn't read the whole book of Deuteronomy, so I'll just keep reading it. Because basically, if it's something short, like I clicked the 2 Thessalonians one day, I just read the whole thing, and then but I'm not going to sit down and read all of Deuteronomy. So
right.
I clicked it and then I kept reading today. This is what I came across. This is going to blow your mind. Okay, here we go.
All right.
So here we're picking up Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 15. It says, diligently watch yourselves because you did not see any form on the day the Lord spoke to you out of the fire at Horeb. So you don't act corruptly and make an idol for yourselves in the shape of any figure, a male or female form, or the form of any animal on the earth, or any winged creature that flies in the sky, any creature that crawls on the ground, or any fish in the waters under the earth. When you look to the heavens and see the sun, moon, and stars, all the stars in the sky, do not be led astray to bow and worship to them and serve them. The Lord your God has provided them for all people everywhere under heaven. But the Lord selected you and brought you out of Egypt's iron furnace to be a people for his inheritance, as you are today. What did he provide them for?
And that seems to me that he has to tell them not to worship the stars because that's tempting.
Right.
That they're so amazing and so brilliant. And those of us who live in cities, we don't even see the stars anymore. But if you've ever gone outside the city and you looked up at night, in California, there's this amazing place called Joshua Tree. And I remember as a kid going out to Joshua Tree and looking up for the first time and being like, what? This is what the sky looks like? I couldn't fathom the beauty of it. And so, yeah, it's tempting. And we're definitely not doing that here.
I just think it's really interesting that you've highlighted Psalm 19, and then this information we're looking at now, and it talks about God providing them for all people. Generally, you'd think, well, he provided them for light in the skies, and that's true and stuff. But then, obviously, according to Psalm 19, whatever metaphorical language it's using there, God's provided them to reveal knowledge, right? So carry on. I just wanted to check that in there. I felt like that was that's
great. That's great stuff. So still, just like that, right? Just like Deuteronomy 4, the Bible still does make a surprising number of references to signs in the heavens. Both Old and New Testaments assume that what happens up there matters. If we are interested in following the accounts of the Bible, we must hold a distinction in mind. Astrology assumes that stars are causes of earthly events. The Bible assumes that they can be messages about earthly events. It may be useful to think of this as a thermometer distinction. A thermometer can tell you if it's hot or cold, but it can't make you hot or cold. There is a big difference between a sign and an active agent. This is the difference between astrology and what the Bible holds forth. This blew my mind. Okay, this blew my mind. All right, so follow this here. Scholars believe that the book of Job is the oldest biblical text, likely originating from the time of Abraham, of the founding of the Jewish nation. It's interesting then to find that this oldest book speaks of the stars and the constellations with respect. It states that God set them in place, and it references the same constellations we know today. How is that possible? That blows my mind. How is Job, and I've never caught that before. How is Job referencing the same constellations that we know today unless God named these constellations? Okay. Even considering ancient literature other than the Bible, it appears that the configurations of the constellations and what they represent may be older than the oldest surviving text of any language.
So, in other words, what you're saying is, I'm gonna be the skeptic here.
Okay.
You're saying Job, in one of the oldest manuscripts or the oldest written, it's considered contemporary with Abraham or Abram, if you want to, before he was named Abraham.
Yeah.
And that they were called much like what they are called now in English, like that the bear or whatever. What does he say there?
Mm-hmm.
He is the maker of the bear, or the Orion.
Ursa Major, yeah.
How do we know that we didn't? I'm interested for the other language speakers, like maybe a Spanish speaker or a Russian. I don't know. Would they have the same names, or do we just, because we're like a Western developed Judeo-Christian culture, we've just taken these names from the Bible?
It's a good question. I mean, he says the bear, and we have to infer that that's Ursa Major, that it's the traditional bear constellation that we now call Ursa Major. Right. But he literally calls it Orion. I mean, these configurations, these names, predate any civilization we know of and are contained in these civilizations. They name them the same things, which is unbelievable to me. Like, watch the book of Job, chapter 9. Job credits God with creation of the stars and the constellations. He is the maker of the bear and Orion, the Pleiades and the constellations of the south. He made the constellations. He named them. In Job chapter 38, God makes much the same point. He, not man, is sovereign over the creation, particularly the constellations. Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons? Many other biblical writers and many other passages state that God arranged the stars. For example, says the book of Isaiah in chapter 40, lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name? He named them. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. The fact that he named them is a huge point in this.
It's interesting because I'm kind of pushing back on my own skepticism here.
Sure.
So if we're taking the Bible seriously and it says that God named them, is it reasonable to conclude that God communicated, has communicated, or is communicating, at the very least has communicated to people like Adam, Noah, I don't know, the first people, Job, obviously, that like these are their names. I just want to let you know, this is what I named them.
Yes.
Because that's reasonable to me. I don't see why that should be, why we should be, accused of being pointy-headed fundamentalists or whatever, with looking at this and just going, well, it says that he named him,
And before I did this study, I kind of just assumed that the names were irrelevant, that their names only mattered to astrologers and New Age weirdos, but the names are in the oldest book of the Bible.
Catch this. This will be interesting. So in Genesis 2, it says that God brought the animals to Adam to see what he would name them. So then Adam names the animals, like say he names the bear, right? And then does God then go, okay, that one's the bear, Adam? Doesn't that look like a bear right there to you? Oh yeah, it does look like, okay, that one's the bear. What did you call? Okay, that one is,
Maybe. Yeah. And if God created the stars and then literally named them and then told us those names, then Psalm 19, of course, he speaks through them. He goes on to talk about Psalm 19. And he says, David, we've quoted Psalm 19 a few times here. And he says in conclusion, David chose verb after verb, which says that the stars communicate. An intriguing passage, but isn't it just poetry? Right. That's what kind of we were asking, right? Isn't David just speaking with a poet's elegant symbolism? Symbolism?
Oh boy. This is exciting. I can already see where he's going with this. This is, carry on.
Okay. Are you connecting the dots here? Paul didn't think so. So in the book of Romans, chapter 10, Paul's addressing the question, had the Jews of Christ's day heard that the Messiah had come? He answers the question by saying that of course they had heard. Then he quotes David to make this point. Chapter 10, verse 17. Consequently, the faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. But I ask, did the Jews not hear? Of course they did. Then he goes, boom, quote Psalm 19. Their voice, whose voice in original Psalm 19? The stars. Their voice, the stars' voice, has gone out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world.
Now, what's so interesting to this? So we were talking about this the other day here with our housemates, and we were talking about it's a passage that's often quoted for whether it's missionaries or evangelists or whatever else. How shall they hear unless someone tells them? How shall they hear without a preacher? Faith comes by hearing the word of God, like we just read there.
Right.
But then verse 18, as we've seen right there, it says they've all heard. So this whole rhetorical flourish, and this is kind of how this came about, Eric, right? As we were talking about in our analysis of the Southern Baptist soteriology on the Great Commission, we were talking about this, has everyone heard sufficiently to believe? And we were talking about this with our housemates. And then she made the point that our friend here, I won't say her name because this is public and maybe she doesn't want to. But our friend here made that point that if you see right there in the brackets, it says the Jews, right? Did the Jews not hear? And she had the elect sovereign version commentary study Bible. And so she was looking in the commentary on, it was either Romans 10 or Psalm 19:1. I think it was Romans 10. And they were saying, well, it's just the Jews. Only the Jews have heard. But Paul, it seems to me that Paul's whole point, and I guess he's probably going to go on to say this, so maybe I'm just, repeating the same thing he's going to say, but like Paul's point is to say all of the Jews have heard because everyone has heard.
No, what? No, he doesn't say that.
No,
he doesn't say that. He would maybe agree. Note the structure of Paul's argument. Paul is taking the position that something has happened in the stars which indicated to the Jews of his time that the Messiah had come. As we shall see, the Apostle Peter elsewhere forcefully makes the same argument. Of course, this argument has exactly no force unless something had happened in the stars. The fact that both men employed this line of reasoning shows that they were making the same assumption. They assumed that their listeners were aware of celestial phenomena associated with Christ. It's our quest to determine what those phenomena were. For those who revere the Bible, we've probably seen enough to set us at ease about looking for the meaning in the stars. We're not doing something that the Bible condemns. Just the opposite, but there's one more authority who can put the most devout Christian at ease about looking up after dark, Jesus himself. So we read this. There will be, from Luke chapter 21, Jesus tells us that there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. So it is biblically legitimate, and this, there he quotes your Deuteronomy 4. It is biblically legitimate to look for signs in the stars, but also remember the thermometer distinction, right? Deuteronomy 4, don't be enticed to look up and worship them. So they've done, and the Jewish nation has done this several times. So it's no idle threat or idle warning. It's a temptation for them. They've done it. They were destroyed for doing it. Okay? They did it unto their destruction. But the bottom line on the Bible and the stars, we may look to the stars for signs from God, but we are not to revere the stars themselves. Okay. We need now to discuss what are our parameters here. If we're Bible people and we're looking at the biblical data, what can we know about what this star would have to be? Okay.
So his point, going back just really quickly to the Romans 10 thing, his point about that was that the Jews have heard specifically about the Messiah's advent because there was a sign in the stars.
Yes.
Interesting.
And
I'm not sure I agree yet, but
okay.
I'm gonna keep listening.
There is a major point in here that I think speaks to this.
Okay.
And we'll get there. Okay. Something that I've read in the Bible 100 times and passed it over every single time. Okay.
Don't say pass over. That's a trigger word.
That's fine. We're now ready to examine the qualifications for the star.
Passover is a biblical word.
But saying being passed over. Triggered. Working from the biblical account in Matthew, unpacking it verse by verse, we can compile a list of 9 qualities which must be present before any celestial phenomena can be considered to be the biblical Star of Bethlehem. If any qualification is missing, then we will assume we haven't found our star. All of the following verses come from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2. Now we're going to look at these. He's going to go into some detail to disqualify certain celestial phenomena. I'm going to kind of briefly go over those. But this is important. This part's important.
And I'll give him a point here in favor of the all Jews showed this. Like, if his point is coming from Matthew is a very Jewish book. So if this was something that the Jews specifically were meant to see and to receive, then that makes good sense. So just putting a point in this. Yeah.
You're going to see why. Okay. Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. So to begin, we see again how important the dates of Herod's death is to the investigation. If Herod died in 4 BC, then Christ had to be born before that year. But if Herod died in 1 BC, as the best evidence indicates, then we should look at the years 2 and 3. Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. Who are these magi? The word magi, which is sometimes translated wise men, is the root from the word we get the word we get magic, from our word magic. That doesn't make them all magicians in the present sense of the word. It's not Harry Potter, Wingardium Leviosa. Some of them were learned men in general who studied the physical world and were knowledgeable about many things, including the stars. Magi were often court astronomers who were consulted by the rulers of the day for guidance in affairs of state. This was also true in the much earlier times. For example, during the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, some 500 years earlier, King Nebuchadnezzar kept a stable of court magi. Nebuchadnezzar made the Jewish prophet Daniel chief magus of his court when Daniel was able to interpret a dream the other magi could not. I'm going to take this guy's word for this next stuff because I don't know. But there were magi of various schools. Some of them were more respected than others. We know something of a particular prestigious school of magi from the writings of Philo. Philo was a Jewish philosopher and contemporary of Jesus who lived in the large Jewish community of Alexandria in Egypt.
I didn't know Philo was a contemporary of Jesus.
I did not know that either.
Hmm.
Philo wrote in praise of an Eastern school of magi and their great learning and understanding of the natural world. This school may have descended from the Babylonian magi of Daniel's day. Matthew does report that the wise men were from the east, and Babylon is east of Judea. It was at one part of the Persian Empire, which ties into Philo. So it is possible that wise men were of this prestigious Eastern school. It's possible. This would account for Herod giving them an audience. So it's kind of strange, right? A king over Judea, the emperor-appointed king of Judea, would give these magi an audience. Kind of strange. Why would he do that? They must have had some sort of respectful, honorable reputation. And for his strong reaction to the news they brought. In verse 2, in Matthew chapter 2, he asks, "Where is the one who was born King of the Jews?" So the Magi's question, so this is the Magi asking that question. The Magi's question gives us 3 points for a list of qualifications for the star. Whatever happened in the sky indicated birth, kingship, and the Jews. It also gives us clues about the Magi. They were interested in things Jewish.
So something about the star or something about their learning told them that a king had been born and that he was Jewish.
Yeah.
By the way, just as a little promo plug here, if you want to listen to a fantastic 2-part sermon series on Christmas and the King of the Jews and Jesus' lordship of Jesus being king, Andy Stanley earlier this year, it was just people get so triggered because of stuff that's happened in the past. People that are upset with him and his hermeneutic or how he treats the Bible or whatever else, I just know immediately that you just not listen to much of what he says. Because if you could manuscript it, if you could just take what he said and just chuck it into an article, you would amen him. But because it's coming out of it, it was great. I highly recommend it. Maybe I'll chuck it in the link in the bottom just for kicks for everyone to watch. But
sure,
it's really good.
So the Jews come up and just straight ask, "Where's the one being born King of the Jews?" So birth, kingship, and something Jewish. Right next thing they say is, "We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." So when the wise men said we saw a star in the east, they didn't mean we saw his star while we were in the east. The Greek text here says that the star was anatole, meaning that they saw his star rising in the east. That's what all polar stars do because of the rotation of the earth. Stars rise in the east, but not all celestial objects do that. So that's another qualification for the star. It has to rise in the east like most other stars. The motive of the Magi is coming to Jerusalem tells us a great deal more about them. They wanted to worship a Jewish king. It can't be proven from the text, but it's also quite possible that some of the Magi were Jewish descent, perhaps a Jewish remnant from Daniel's day. This would help explain why a Jewish philosopher, Philo, would admire them, why they were watching the sky for Jewish things, why they wanted to worship a Jewish king, and why they were taken so seriously by Herod and the Jewish chief priests. If they were not Jews, they must have been most impressive Magi indeed, as Jews of the time were deeply disdainful of pagans and their beliefs. I mean, that's true.
So you could argue basically that they were either Jews from a distant land, or maybe they were like proselytes to the God, like Yahweh, in the sense that they were Gentiles, but they weren't pagans.
That Magi school was respected of the Jewish nation and respected by them and respected them in some way. They could have been Jews themselves. So this is amazing to me. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed and all Jerusalem with him. I've read this 100 times, and I've never considered the significance of this statement. Herod was disturbed, and all Jerusalem was as well. You must know more to understand how very troubled Herod and Jerusalem became with the Magi's news. Historians tell us that respect for the stars and the guidance derived from them was at a peak. Both ancient historians and the Bible make it clear that the Jews of this period expected a new Jewish ruler to arise based on Jewish prophecy, and it was accepted that the stars would announce such an arrival. For example, about 60 years earlier, in 63 BC, Magi made a presentation to the Roman Senate. They described celestial portents indicating that a new ruler had been born. Evidently regretting that news, the Senate responded by ordering the death of baby boys in the candidate age range. Sound familiar?
Whoa, hold on.
60 years earlier.
60 years earlier, 60 BC, Magi made a presentation to the Roman Senate that described celestial portents indicating that a new ruler had been born. Evidently regretting that news, the Senate responded by ordering the death of baby boys in the candidate age range. What?
It turns out that when Herod ordered the slaughter of children in Bethlehem, he may have been following a sort of Roman precedent. That precedent may have been one reason Jerusalem was troubled at the news the wise men brought. They knew this had happened before because of signs in the stars that wise men had told the Roman Senate, and they feared Herod would do it too. Perhaps they realized the Romans might shed blood in response. Okay. Matthew 2, verse 4. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea. They replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be shepherd my people Israel, who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Herod took the Magi's message as factual and consulted the Jewish experts about the location of the birth. The fateful verse in the book of Micah, which is quoted to Herod by the Jewish experts, soon resulted in the death of many little boys in Bethlehem. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. So here come two more qualifications for the star. Number 5, it appeared at an exact time. And 6, Herod didn't know when it appeared. This one is huge. Herod didn't know when it appeared. He had to ask. So my assumption before I ever did this study was that God had just done some supernatural, here's a bright light to announce the birth of my son. But that doesn't make sense in light of the biblical data. I was dead wrong about that, because why would Herod have to call them and ask? Why would he have to ask? That makes no sense. Everybody would know. It'd be obvious. There'd be no reason to ask. Does that make sense?
I think it does. And especially the all Jerusalem was disturbed. You know, I mentioned that Andy Stanley sermon earlier, and I noticed that all people were disturbed. And I actually assumed it was because the word had spread around, but I didn't know. Like, in other words, the Magi were the only ones that knew. They told Herod. Herod kind of spread the word, kind of the gossip got out and stuff, and then everybody was disturbed. But I didn't really think about why they would be disturbed. That is interesting. It's an interesting point.
Matthew 2, verse 8, he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until they stopped over the place where the child was. So now we have the last 3 qualifications for the star. It endured over a considerable period of time. The Magi saw it, perhaps from Babylon, and traveled to Judea and saw it still. It went ahead of them as they traveled from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So you may not realize that this doesn't mean the star was needed to guide the travelers to Bethlehem. Bethlehem was and is it's 5 miles from Jerusalem on the main road. It's south, right? 5 miles south of Jerusalem on the main road. You can't miss it. No, the star appears ahead of them as they trek south, not so much as a guide as a further confirmation of the sign they had seen. So it when they looked south, it was ahead of them.
Yeah.
And the star stopped.
This was my question. I'm glad I was worried, Eric, when we started getting into this, because I was kind of tracking with you and I was thinking about this passage. I was thinking, well, the star stopped. And I thought, but wait, if it's something that they saw that signaled them, and then they're just like, where is he? And then I thought, well, what about the star coming in and stopping?
Okay.
So my interest is piqued.
The star stopped. I will show you the star stopping. Okay. I will show you. All right.
Okay.
The star stopped. Can a star do that? Yes, it can. And we will see. Okay. Here we go. We've been doing this. We're here. Okay. We've set the stage. We've got it. Okay. We're here. Are you ready? So now we know a lot about the star. It signified birth. It signified kingship, and a connection with the Jewish nation. It rose in the east like other stars. It appeared at a precise time. Herod didn't know when it appeared. It wasn't obvious. It was something normal in the night sky. And it endured over a period of time. It was ahead of the Magi as they went south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. It stopped over Bethlehem. It stopped. So knowing these qualifications, we are in a position to disqualify most of the astronomical phenomena as being a star. Remember that if any of the 9 biblical features of the star is absent, then the phenomena we're examining may not be interesting, but it isn't likely a star. So it can't really be a meteor, okay? Can't be a comet. If you want to look into these exact why you're skeptical, go ahead and you can come back and read this. Can't really be a nova. So what's left? Okay, what's left? To summarize, the main thing that really disqualifies these other things were 2 main things. The first main thing is Herod had to ask. So if it was some sort of nova, or if you've ever seen a shooting star, which is a meteor being burned up in the sky, or even a comet, even though those happened every once in a while, and the ancients were familiar with comets, you wouldn't have had to ask. It would have been something strange in the sky, and they would have seen it. The other one was comets are a portent of doom. They weren't something that people would see as a good thing, like a birth or a kingship. It was a portent of doom.
It's interesting too, because were the ancients like, oh, that comet, man, if that came like this way instead of that way, we'd all be dead. Was that kind of their thing? I wonder if that was.
Yeah,
like, don't look up.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's right. That's right. So anyone that Herod had to ask when the star appeared is a powerful clue. Okay, that's the key, because anyone can glance up and see planets and stars. That's the nature of the things in the sky. But apparently one could look up at the Star of Bethlehem, the Bethlehem Star, without realizing it. Herod didn't know of it. It took Magi to explain it to him. But once the star was pointed out, all Jerusalem went abuzz, and Herod jumped into murderous action. A reasonable hypothesis is that the star must have been something in the normal night sky which was striking when explained. So did anything interesting happen in the ordinary night skies over the Middle East in 3 or 2 BC? Yes, indeed. Here we go. Here we go. Okay. Jupiter, the name of the greatest god of Roman mythology and the name of the largest planet of our solar system. Jupiter has been known from ages old, we've discussed that, as the present to the present as the king planet. This greatest of planets is a gas giant, approximately 11 times the size of Earth and over 300 times more massive. It circles the sun far beyond Earth in an orbit of about 12 years duration. In ancient times, planets like Jupiter were considered wandering stars. Since humans have assigned kingly qualities to this giant wanderer for dozens of centuries, might it have something to do with our star announcing the birth of a king? This will be our working theory. It's not enough to have a kingly name and reputation, of course. To be Matthew's star, Jupiter has, as viewed from Earth, would have to do peculiar things. More precisely, as considered by a magus viewing from the Middle East during the years 3 and 2 BC, Jupiter's movements would have had to satisfy all 9 identifying characteristics of the star. In September of 3 BC, at the time of the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, Jupiter began to do just that. A magus watching Jupiter that September saw two objects moving so close they appeared to touch. This close approach of celestial bodies is sometimes called a conjunction. Want me to show you? This is a program called Stellarium, and it uses Kepler's laws of planetary motion to predict back, using software and computers to predict back what the stars were doing over Jerusalem into BC. So I can actually go, I want to show this to you. I don't have it perfectly set up because I want to show you that I'm just not making this up. And I'm not just putting some computer software magic on this. Okay. I want to show this to you. We're going to look for Jupiter. Okay. We're going to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Okay. We're at Jerusalem. Then we're going to go to 2 BC in September.
And this is just like a random separate program that is linked to this.
I just downloaded this one. You can get a super amazing one for $50.
In other words, it's not like an internal program that you clicked on this website that's all hijacked and,
No. I wanted to show you that process because I wanted to see that we are at Jupiter. We have Jupiter here. We are at 3 BC. It's August of 3 BC. I wanted to show you this setup that we're looking at Jupiter, 3 BC, and we're going to go through the actions as the website as the website narrates them. Okay. A magus watching Jupiter that September saw two objects moving so close that they appeared to touch. This close approach of celestial bodies is sometimes called a conjunction. Our Middle Eastern viewers saw Jupiter come into a close conjunction with the star Regulus. Regulus takes its name from the root word, which means our word regal. The Babylonians called Regulus Sharu, which means king. The Romans called Regulus Rex, which means king. So to start things, at the beginning of the Jewish New Year, the planet of kings met the star of kings. Let me show it. All right, so watch this. So here's Jupiter, and here's Regulus. See that? And I'm going to go day over day, and you're going to watch it get closer and closer and closer.
Right.
And we're in September. We're going through September. And the Magi are watching. And October, we're in October now. And this program kind of spins, I think, because of the rotation of the Earth. It spins. Don't worry about that.
You can
still see Regulus is right here. Yeah. Regulus is up there. Let's move this so you can still see it. He begins to move back, and then so this is 2 BC, and then he begins as they're watching this. This is February coming into March, and he starts moving towards Regulus again.
Interesting. So it moves towards Regulus, stops around Marchish. Well, stops in October and doesn't move for a while until March, and then it starts moving towards it again. And this, as he's going to go on to say, this isn't that big of a deal. He's moving towards Regulus, okay? And he moves towards Regulus, and this is a conjunction. See that? That's considered a conjunction. And so you can see how it sort of doubled the brightness in the night sky of the celestial body. Right. So he conjuncted with Regulus. Would that have been enough? So it's the next year, it's 2 BC, it's September, and you have a conjunction with Regulus. Okay?
This conjunction may have indicated kingship in a forceful way to a Babylonian magus, satisfying one qualification for the star. But would it have startled him? Would it have gotten him off his seat and moving towards Jerusalem? Probably not. Jupiter glides slowly past Regulus about every 12 years. So let's assume our magus enjoyed a 50-year career, say from age 20 to 70. We don't know how old the Magi were, but if our man was in the second half of his career, he may have already seen such a pass 2 or 3 times before. So Jupiter's orbit wobbles relative to Regulus. So, and it kind of wobbles up and down. So not every conjunction is as close as this one. But perhaps our magus recorded this event with some interest, but it's hard to imagine great excitement. Not from this alone, but of course there's more. The planets move against the field of fixed stars. From Earth, they appear to be active. For example, were you to watch Jupiter every night for several weeks, you would see that it moves eastward, as we watched, right, through the starry field. Each night, Jupiter rises in the east, satisfying a second star qualification. Each night appears to be slightly further east in the field of stars. That's why our thing was rotating, because it moves east and this thing has to orient itself. All of the planets move like this. But the wandering stars exhibit another stranger motion. Periodically, they will appear to reverse course and move backward through the other stars. This may seem odd, but the reason is simple enough. We watch the planets from a moving platform, Earth, hurling around the sun in its own orbit. So it kind of will go backwards sometimes. When you pass a car on the freeway, it appears to go backward as it drops behind, right? For similar reasons, when the Earth moves in its orbit, swings past another planet, that a planet appears to be moving backward against the starry field. Astronomers call this optical effect a retrograde motion. This is a retrograde motion. In 3-2 BC, Jupiter's retrograde wandering would have called for our Magus's full attention. We just ended off on this. After Jupiter and Regulus had their kingly encounter, Jupiter continued on its path through the starry field, but then it entered a retrograde. It changed its mind and headed back to Regulus again for a third rendezvous and headed back to Regulus for a second conjunction. After this second pass, it reversed course again for a third rendezvous with Regulus, a triple conjunction. A triple pass like this is more rare. Over a period of months, our watching magus would have seen the planet of kings dance out a halo over the star of kings, a coronation. Let's watch this. I'm going to back it up. I'm going to back it up to right before the first conjunction. And I'm going to hit a little thing here that gives me a trail. I'm going to show a trail. I want you to watch this. Over the course of the few months as it got closer to Regulus, it conjuncts with it, it keeps going, and then it stops, pauses, changes its mind, comes back, so it's just pausing and hanging in the sky, comes back, conjuncts with Regulus a second time, goes past, stops again, and comes back and conjuncts with Regulus a third time. See that? Isn't that amazing? And if you look at the motion, it's a coronation. It looks like a crown. Drew, how you doing? You skeptical? You on board? Where are you at?
I admit that I'm a little. I think it's interesting. I think the thing that I'm trying to get my head around is the coronation, and I guess the fact that so we're operating under the assumption that God at some stage communicated to these magi that these were regal stars, in Jupiter being one of them.
Before any written record of any civilization, these these wandering stars and constellations had these names.
Right. And so then there's this regal sense to the stars, and then there's a coronation that this doesn't happen like super frequently, that the retrograde motion, the Jupiter and all that stuff happens, I guess, semi-frequently, like he was saying. That's not that big of a deal.
Every
But
12
the fact
years.
that it comes the fact that it comes back and forth, and these two regal celestial entities are interacting with one another, that it communicates.
Yeah. And
kinship.
he rolls out a halo, like rolls out a crown on him, that he comes by, he goes across the top of him 3 times.
Okay, I see what you're saying with the coronation. I wasn't so the crown, a coronation being a crown, like a circle.
He goes around him.
I get it. Got it.
He goes on top 3 times. He marks it out. And each time it's a conjunction. So it's the planet of kings with the constellation of kings. So you see Leo here and Jupiter. Okay, hold on. There's more. But wait, there's more. Okay, it's not over. All right, this is where it gets really interesting. Because remember, it has to be a birth. How do we get a birth out of any of this? Okay, right? How do we get a birth out of any of this? And if you're astute, if you kind of know where I'm going with this, you can see her coming. You can see her coming, but I'm not going to give it away yet. Okay, Drew, I want to show you this coronation again. We kind of go through it in steps because I was showing you the retrograde motion. I was showing you the conjunctions that Jupiter was making with Regulus. But I just want to show you this coronation here again. So let's watch Jupiter coronate or draw a crown around Regulus. This is the king planet drawing a crown over the king star. And this isn't the only symbolism going on in the sky at this time, which is why this is so significant. And this is why Herod didn't see it, because it was regular natural phenomena going on in the sky. But then when it was described to him, was very alarmed and killed lots of people because of what was in the sky. So, but this is one of them, and we're going to go on to see the other ones. And I just want to summarize this here for you. So let's watch Jupiter do this. We're going to go across the days. This is 2 BC, as you can see. This is the first conjunction. He goes through. He stops, retrograde motion. He pauses in the sky, changes his mind, so to speak, and goes back. There he goes. You can kind of see how relatively long he pauses. And then look how it's kind of a slight circle, because then he conjuncts with Regulus, but not exactly in the same place. It's not a straight line. If you notice that. That's a conjunction number 2. Then he fully separates, changes his mind again, and comes back again for another conjunction with Regulus. See that? So that's the coronation that the Maguses would have noticed in the sky. They would have seen this unfold over months, and it would have intrigued them and actually got them on the move. And then they would have kept watching the sky as they were moving. All right. Jupiter's interesting behavior may explain the kingly aspect of the star. So it's a coronation, king planet, king star, coronation, kingly aspect, okay? But there are 9 qualifications of the Star of Bethlehem. Many are still missing. How did Jupiter's movement relate to the Jewish nation? Is its association with the Jewish New Year enough? Okay, so Drew, notice how this coronation is taking place within the constellation of Leo, the lion. If you're an Old Testament history nerd, Lion of Judah, anybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
The book of Genesis, chapter 49. You are a lion's club, O Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. And this is the lion is the symbol of the tribe of Judah, or the 12 tribes of Israel. And right after this, in chapter 49 of Genesis, they talk about the next line is that Judah is the ruling tribe. Okay, verse 10, the scepter will not depart from Judah. What is that? The ruling scepter. And he even says it, nor the ruling staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. That's obviously Christ. So there's this connection between the coming of the one whom the scepter belongs to and the fact that Judah is holding the scepter. And here we have right here the coronation of a Jewish king happening within Leo the lion, which is the symbol of the tribe of Judah. So this is Jewish, and the Magi would have seen this as Jewish. They would have known about Leo the lion and how Judah is their symbol is the lion. Okay, but this isn't all though. Okay, this isn't the only thing that's going on here. What I want to show you is this. Right after this third conjunction, I paused it right here on purpose. Right after the third conjunction, you're going to see who starts coming. And she starts coming. And by her, I mean Venus, the Virgin. The symbolism here is unmistakable. The Virgin, who does that make you think of?
Mary.
Right. So he continues on after crowning Regulus, and after the third conjunction, he continues on through the starry field. And let's watch this. Watch who starts coming. Watch who starts coming. There she is. Do you see her? There's Venus. There she is. And here she comes. And think of being a magi who is looking up at the sky every night. And every night you see this. This, what I'm clicking right here, is days. Every day, Venus gets closer. Every day, Venus gets closer. And Venus is here, and she's coming, and she's not stopping. And here she comes. Watch this. Just wanted you to watch this. Look at this. Boom.
By the way, our audio listeners are going to be so confused.
What? Yeah.
If you're listening to audio, come on over to YouTube and watch this episode.
Right. And I apologize to our audio listeners, because if you've got your phone in your pocket and you're listening to this, it's on YouTube, but you're listening to it, you're going to have to pull it out and look.
Yeah.
Because what we just saw, and I'm going to back it up. What we just saw was after Jupiter crowns Regulus, he comes through, and Venus, the Virgin planet, comes and creates the brightest thing anyone at that time, anyone alive, would have ever seen in the sky, and conjuncts with Jupiter. They are indistinguishable. You cannot tell the difference between them. Look at that. You cannot tell the difference between them. And it is the brightest thing in the sky. This, Drew, this is the Star of David. This.
And it's interesting because you know, like you said, it would have been doing this whole dance, you know. So Jupiter is doing this whole dance around what was that?
Regulus.
Sorry, Regulus.
Yeah,
he's doing this whole dance around Regulus. And then, you know, you're still watching because you're intrigued. And then this happens. You'd be like, oh, you know, all of a sudden there's this really bright spot in the sky that would definitely draw your attention.
Well, the other thing that is, if you were counting and these guys were counting, okay, you track what you're seeing, because it's every day you're seeing small movements. And so you track your thoughts and you track these movements. And so they were writing this stuff down, no doubt. And they're tracking this, and they're tracking dates. And if they begin to think that something big is going on with Jupiter and Regulus, they would try to track back, well, when did that start? And what they're going to find out and what they're going to see as they look back on this is that this conjunction right here, boom, 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 is 9 months after Jupiter starts crowning Regulus. That coronation begins happening. That conjunction first happens, and then Jupiter goes back and does it again. From the start of that to this is 9 months. I mean,
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
All of these things by themselves, you might be able to say, I don't know, but all of it
right
together. And so when you see all of these things together and you see how many biblical texts it lines up with, and then this is explained to Herod, and the Bible says all of Jerusalem was disturbed because Herod was disturbed. And because of the direction in which this was pointing, he asked, where would this happen? Where was this king born? And Jerusalem was rightly disturbed because he killed all of the young boys in that age range by the time that the Magi got to him. By the time they told him about this, and however much time had passed between then, he was able to trace it back to when the brightest spectacle anyone had ever seen had happened, and he killed all of the boys in that age range. And this is June. Again, June of 1 BC. And this happened through September of the following year. That's 9 months. So this, from the biblical data, those 9 things that we said had to be fulfilled, this star, which is actually a conjunction of 2 planets, and back then they called the planets wandering stars because they didn't act exactly like the other stars, and they would do this crazy stuff like this, but nothing this crazy and this compacted all together in a 9-month period. This star right here that we're looking at satisfies all those qualifications. It was kingly, it was Jewish, it was natural enough that Herod had to be told about it, but significant enough that it disturbed him and he was murderous because of it. And all of this stuff happened over a period of time that would pique their interest, get them moving, and then sort of lead on before them as they traveled from the east. And so it would, again, the planets do rise in the east.
So this planet that they've seen, is it his contention essentially that they're moving in the same direction as the planet, as Jupiter?
Yeah, they're going to be moving east. And it's in front of them. And you see the few times in which Jupiter sort of stops. And that he would have continued on through the sky, but still in the east.
So I guess if you imagine this, I'm a visual person. So if you imagine this and you look, maybe not directly up, but sort of like at an angle, and then in the sense that it's moving in that direction, it would just be kind of pointing in the direction that they were already walking, which is towards Jerusalem.
That's right. And it would have done the stopping. It stopped over. We already saw that. It's that retrograde motion where it pauses in the sky. And it stayed there for days. And that would have been very strange. And you can imagine that as they relate this story to Herod, and then as that story is related to Matthew, that they would have described that as hanging over Bethlehem. And it would have viewed, since they were going in that direction, it would have seemed like it had stopped over Bethlehem. That the timing of them leaving, the timing that would have gotten them moving as they saw something happening, all that timing would have, as they traveled east to Jerusalem and they saw it pause. And Bethlehem's really close to Jerusalem. It's not that far of a walk. That it would have paused right over that little town in the night sky. It would have seemed like that. It would have over several days stayed in the same place in the night sky, and they would have pointed at Bethlehem. And so I think for me, what that shows is a God who is more unbelievably glorious for doing it this way and for being able to orchestrate the birth of his son around all of this naturally occurring that he set in motion thousands of years ago, billions of years ago, whatever you think about that. He set all of this in motion. Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Yahweh wrote those laws, set them in the sky, set the planets in motion to have all of this be predictable. And for all of this to be happening at this time, at what we now call 123 BC, what we now call it, and for all of this to be happening at that time, and for him to orchestrate the birth of his son at that time. That is more glorious and more amazing, in my view, than an all-powerful God snapped his fingers and created a light from nothing.
Right. I see what you're saying. Right. Yeah, because the whole point is that this is a peculiarly behaving light in the sky, star. And the question is, was this essentially an orb that God created and just moved as a guide? Or was it this, what is it? Jupiter over Regulus dance plus Venus coming in and making it super bright in the sky. And so those are the essentially, I guess, the options that you have is either this was if you want to call it a natural, really well-timed phenomenon, or something that God created and did in the moment. So
yeah,
it's really
and something that's interesting about it too is that planetariums all over the world rotate this in their exhibit of, if you've ever been to a planetarium, right, they'll have like these huge massive domes or rotating exhibits that show kind of the planetary motion. And all over the world, they do this Jupiter retrograde, Venus, and then eventual Venus conjunction, because it is the most brilliant thing that they can come up with, that it is the brightest thing. And they all do this using Kepler's laws of planetary motion. But they're not doing it to symbolize Christ. But isn't that interesting that astronomers and scientists pay homage to this in their exhibits? God used to, in my opinion, announce the birth of his son. And this is all pretty clear that this is what's going on here, and all the symbolism. And even though they don't see those things, they still see what the Magi saw in the sky 2,000 years ago, are in awe by it, and put it in their exhibit.
And I think maybe as a bit of a recap and kind of what started this, because we began this broadcast a little while ago, shortly after we were talking about the universal witness of the gospel at the end of our episode on where we were analyzing the traditionalist statement of essentially Southern Baptist soteriology. And it's interesting too to think that in these planetariums where people are looking at the star, you know, viewer, maybe you don't buy this yet, maybe you do, I don't know, but just saying for argument's sake that this is what it was, then the planetariums and all these science exhibits are showing all these people the stars, and it's essentially the good news of Jesus's arrival, whether they know it or not, that they're seeing. And then, you know, I get it. They're not receiving cogent information into their minds that makes sense, right? They don't know all this different stuff. But back to our original. So this is Psalm 19, where we were talking about this, and we mentioned this at the beginning of this episode, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while.
Yep.
Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The expanse proclaims the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour out speech. Night after night, they communicate knowledge. And so this is an example of God revealing himself to people through creation, right? And then you have stuff like in Romans 1, where it says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. It's interesting too, by the way, someone once pointed out to me that the wrath of God from heaven is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, not against men themselves, like as people, which I thought is kind of interesting nuance there. I know that you can't separate the two, and that it's not like godlessness and unrighteousness is some kind of amorphous force that God's wrath is directed towards. But I think that is an interesting nuanced point. And then it says, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so, if I'm not mistaken, this shown it to them is something that God is doing in a person. And it's really interesting too, because this says, because what may be known of God is manifest in them. Some versions will read a little bit differently, but it's interesting that this says in them, for God has shown it to them. And so whatever you believe about this particular point and the stars, it is interesting to think that astronomers, scientists, whatever, have essentially discovered this as a really amazing phenomenon, which should point people towards, you know, there's something here. There's some beauty here. There's some design here. There's something that's holding this together, you know, and that points people towards God. That's God revealing himself to them. So it is really interesting when you kind of put these things together in terms of the landscape of, as you're looking into these things, or if you become interested in astronomy, this is something that you're going to run across, right? It's a really cool thing.
And the later on, towards the end of the book of Romans, in Romans 10, if you remember, again, we're kind of recapping the stuff we did at the beginning here, that Paul relates the Jews specifically knowing about Christ to Psalm 19. Romans chapter 10, verse 17, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. But I asked, did the Jews not hear? Of course they did. Their voice has gone out, and he quotes now, their voice has gone out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Which voice? The voice of the stars. That's what it's the Psalm 19 that he's quoting. So they knew about this, and they're without excuse. And this one, I started this broadcast by saying, checkmate atheists. You can view Christianity as a stuffy religion all you want, but how do you explain this stuff? How do you explain that at the time Christians apparently mistakenly think that Jesus was born, or this guy Jesus that Christians falsely elevated to this level of Messiah, which he's not, obviously. And he was never resurrected from the dead, obviously. And he was never born of a virgin, obviously. How do you come to terms with that view that Jesus is this nobody that Christians made up to be somebody, with the utterly separate uh, knowledge, the utterly separate revelation from the stars?
Right.
I'm just following Kepler's laws of planetary motion here. I'm not. What am I doing? I'm just using a computer software program to trace back Kepler's laws of planetary motion, which has nothing to do with the Bible in a sense, right? We can there could be some stuff we could do there with everything relates to the Bible. Some pious Christian stuff we could say there. I don't know, but from an atheist viewpoint, the laws of planetary motion aren't gleaned from special revelation. They aren't gleaned from the Bible. They're gleaned completely separately. We would say because Yahweh created them. They would say no. But either way, I'm just following those. And here it is, right at the time that we say that Jesus was born.
And it's interesting too, because we also started this broadcast by saying that God names the stars, he calls them by name. And it's not as though this is some kind of Judeo-Christian tradition that they saw happen and they go, oh, yep, that's the king star. And then this is this one, and that's Venus, and that's going to symbolize the Virgin. They're named independently of the biblical data on the matter, you know? So it's not as though this is some kind of, I guess, you know, you and I, Eric, we have, whether it's Calvinism or atheism or any other kind of ism or thought that's kind of like against what we believe to be the truth, what we're persuaded to believe is true, is that voice. And so I'm just thinking, oh, well, you know, really, you know, I guess your options are it's a coincidence. I mean, and man, I gotta admit,
what a heck of a coincidence.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
This was I guess maybe you could say like this was a tradition that was lost at some stage, and that the stars were named that because this was believed to be that. But that seems like a little bit of a stretch. One thing, viewers, if you've not read this book yet, Tactics by Greg Kokel talks about having conversations with people and how to kind of logically or rationally think through things. And he has 3 different questions, which is it possible? Is it reasonable? I think are the 3. Is it possible? Is it reasonable? Is it plausible? So it's possible, right? Is it reasonable? I don't see any reason to think that it's not reasonable, right? And then is it plausible? I mean, yeah, it seems plausible. So unless there's evidence that's strongly against this, which maybe there is, maybe some of you have, you know, studied up on this and stuff, and you're like, well, actually, and you can do that. I'm happy to listen, but it's really interesting. I gotta admit,
there are some objections to this, and some of the objections that I've seen to this is the date of Herod's death. That, oh no, Josephus got it right. He did die sooner than this, and this can't be it. I don't even think that's much of an objection, though, because if you say the Bible isn't a historical textbook, it's not a scholastic Western, we're trying to be exactly accurate thing. If you said Herod died in 5 BC and Herod in 2 BC orders the deaths of all these children, it's plausible to me that the biblical writers would see some sort of Herod's son was very young, and so there was some sort of steward that took over until Herod's son could take over. So if you could just call it Herod. And even if it was, the proxy of the sun, or the, what would be the term? Like not a proxy, but interim king, that you would just call it Herod.
Like your interim pastor, but an interim king.
Like an interim king. You're right. You would just call it Herod, because it's Herod. It's Herod's line. It's Herod's family. It's Herod's influence. It's Herod's court. It's Herod. But he's been dead 3 years. That doesn't seem like that kills our case here, to me. But that's the objection I've seen. It's like, no. Herod's already dead at this time, so it can't be him who's talking to the Magi. So even if it's not him, and it's some sort of proxy,
you're saying that like their objection wouldn't be necessarily to the data on the stars or the date, but that
no,
just
you
from
can't.
the biblical
What are you
text itself,
right? What are you objecting to here? It's
Right.
just Kepler's laws of planetary motion. I don't know how to change any of that. I don't. If you're telling me that this software's got it wrong, I'm open to hearing that. But and Kepler's got those laws wrong. Okay, I'm not. I'm
like
not
that.
in.
Okay.
I'm not in on that. If that's a scientific dispute, I don't know about it. I haven't heard about it. Yes, the idea is the dispute is the biblical evidence that says, oh yeah, it was Herod who talked to these Magi. Well, he was already dead. Even if it was a placeholder for his son who's not of age yet, he's not 13 yet, it's still Herod.
Right. Yeah, I confess that I've not done a lot of apologetics work on some of these questions. It's kind of one of those things that I remember wrestling with in my first few years of uni, kind of found some answers that I found pretty satisfactory, and then just kind of moved on. I guess because it just feels like, and don't get me wrong, I'm as much of a pointy-headed fundamentalist as it goes, but there are these tweets that talk about like, what was it? Capturing Christianity the other day retweeted this thing that was, I've noticed something in common between atheists and fundamentalists, both interpret the Bible literally. And I was like, I just said this to somebody that interacted with our post recently, which is, when you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that hollers is the one you hit. So I felt hit by this a little bit, I was like, well, wait a second. I don't know what you mean by fundamentalist here, but I try to take the Bible pretty seriously. It's no secret among my friends and family that I'll throw down with you on young reservationism and stuff like that. It's not a hill that I'm willing to die on, but I'm persuaded of it. I'm a debater, sort of argumentative personality type. So that kind of, so I am the type of person to take things quite seriously, but I'm also happy to acknowledge that when I was wrestling with a lot of these things, as far as apologetics and stuff, my eyes were on Jesus and his death and resurrection. And that's the one central piece. I'm not, I confess that I'm, our friend of the podcast, Braxton Hunter, Trinity Radio. Can we call him a friend of the podcast? I don't know. Friend of the online friend. I don't know. Anyways, he often says that if Jesus died and was raised from the dead by God, then Christianity is true, period. Which I think I agree with. But I'm also like, I confess that I'm also slightly uncomfortable with then saying, therefore, this other stuff isn't as important. But I don't know that that's necessarily what's trying to be communicated there, other than the fact that this is the centerpiece and this is what we should focus in on. But I don't know. I don't know exactly where I was going with that. I was just basically saying that.
You haven't looked much into the birth stuff. This isn't we spend most of our time doing an apologetic over his death and resurrection, whether that was true or not. And I think there's good reasons for that. But yeah, we haven't really done an apologetic on hey, atheist, what do you think about the Bethlehem Star? And
Yeah,
maybe we should. Maybe that's a good kind of point to
if you're an
talk about.
atheist and you're listening to this podcast and you made it this long, you should email us and tell us what you think, because we want to hear. Congratulations. I'm impressed. Yeah, I'd be really interested in some interaction on this.
Yeah, it'd be interesting for me to have someone who maybe knows more about astrology than I do, can, work this software like it's the back of their hand, sit down with an atheist and go like, explain this to me. That'd be interesting for me to see. Explain how this doesn't have anything to do with Christianity.
This has been a bit of a two-parter. We filmed this in two different segments, and from what we understand, it's going to be on the longer side of our podcast. If you have listened this long, I'm impressed. You're one of our choice viewers, and I just want to say
you are choice meats.
Yeah, absolutely. You heard it here from the mouth of Eric and Drew. You're a choice meat. So if you enjoy this podcast and this content and you want to take us out to a coffee for $5 or something like that, you can join the Patron team by clicking down below in the links there. You can also click the join button if you want to join through YouTube. That's an option as well. Whenever we do live streams and premieres, it gives you an option after you've been on the YouTube team to be seen a little bit more brightly, and you get like a little badge next to you so that we can actually see you on there. Richard R. I think he's the only one that's joined through YouTube. But
we're all about perks and incentives here at the Provisionist Perspective.
One of the things that we've been doing up there recently is brainstorming merch. So we have some merch ideas. We're hoping to get those kind of actioned and stuff and actually up on Teespring and stuff like that. So that's another benefit of joining us in there on the Patron Discord.
We need creative people and designers to help us, please.
Pretty much. I feel like the idea man, I have ideas, but I just don't know how to make those ideas happen, especially when it comes to artwork and different stuff. We do have some good discussion up there. To be honest, there aren't all that very many people of us active right now. And as I said, if you're already on the team and you're up there, re-download the app, join in and discuss with us. I do enjoy kind of just posting an online shenanigan or whatever and riffing back and forth about some different things. So it's good fun.
This episode was my little surprise for Drew and something different that we had, a different topic that we haven't really discussed before. Something pretty unique, something that blew my mind in terms of natural revelation. And I'm surprised how much biblical justification there is for looking at symbols in the stars. And so I wanted to blow Drew's mind too. Hopefully I succeeded in doing that. And yeah, there you go. There it is. Comment below how much you super disagree with us and how much more heretics we are now since we're talking about the Bethlehem Star. Or tell us that this was something that you never thought of before. Now you're persuaded and now you're on our team. Either way, we like it. Put a like down there, put a comment down there if you've made it this far. And we'll see
the like button. That helps us too.
It does. Algorithms, all that stuff works. And we will see you next time on the Provisionist Perspective, where we'll hopefully do some more spicy stuff. See ya.
Peace. Let's be honest, though. Nobody's going to watch this episode. If you've made it this far, again, super impressed. Comment below to let me know that you did. And since you made it this far, and this is going to be probably one of our fewer viewed episodes because it's not really in the kind of controversial realm that gets a lot of clicks and stuff, you can also click this episode right. How do I point at it? Oh, yeah. This episode right here, which is about mental health in the church. We really enjoyed recording it, but it's one of our fewer viewed episodes. So check it out. Click it.